We're selling your house tomorrow." The words hit harder than the cold air drifting in from the doorway. My son, Ethan, stood with his wife, Claire, both dressed in black. I was still holding the last photo of my husband, the one taken beside this same fireplace 30 years ago. "I'm Margaret Lane, 53, and this is the house we built together." I thought grief would bring family closer. Instead, it stripped away whatever kindness was left. That morning, sunlight crept across the kitchen tiles, catching on the chipped mug he used every day. The coffee smelled the same, bitter, grounding, alive. I touched the photograph's frame, tracing the grain of the wood he carved himself. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, except for a distant car radio humming an old love song. I remember thinking how small sounds felt enormous now that his laughter was gone. I whispered to no one. He built this place with his hands. The warmth hurt, but I held on to it. Ethan cleared his throat. "We already have a buyer lined up," he said. "You'll get your share once it's processed." "My share?" I asked softly. Claire stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor he refinished one summer. "Dad didn't leave a will on file, Mom. Legally, the estate defaults to next of kin, meaning Ethan. It's all standard." I looked at the folded paper in her hand. My husband's funeral wasn't even over. The smell of fresh lilies still clung to their jackets. "You came here from the church to do this?" I asked. Claire's smile was thin. "We just need cooperation. The paperwork moves faster that way." Ethan avoided my eyes. "It's better for everyone, Mom. You don't want the stress." I wanted to scream, but the silence felt heavier, stronger. Instead, I nodded. "If your father were here, he'd tell me to stay calm." "He'd tell you to move on," Claire said. Something inside me shifted. I glanced at the mantel where his jacket still hung. Inside its pocket was the letter he'd written weeks before his surgery. I hadn't read it since the hospital. Now the memory of his words returned, about keeping the home safe, about registering it under a trust only I could access. They didn't know. They thought they held every card, but they'd never seen the signature page. By afternoon, the mourners had left. I made tea for one and watched dust dance in the light slanting through the curtains. The house felt smaller, stripped of comfort, yet alive in its defiance. The warmth I once drew from it turned into armor. Grief was teaching me to be quiet differently, measured, deliberate. As evening came, the smell of rain drifted through the cracked window. I unfolded the letter again, fingers brushing its coarse paper. My husband's handwriting tilted slightly, as if written in a hurry. "Everything you need is within these walls," it read. "Trust yourself when they test you." My throat tightened. He must have known something. About Ethan's debts, about the pressure building long before his death. He'd left me more than words. He'd left me instructions. I packed away the funeral flowers before they wilted, setting the mug beside the photograph. Each object felt like proof of what this house truly was, his legacy, my shelter, their target. The ticking of the hallway clock marked the first night I realized I couldn't rely on love to keep me safe. When the sky turned dark, I locked every window, every door. I stood in the entryway, listening to the old hinges click into place, and whispered, "You built it right, love. They'll never take it from me." I folded his letter and locked every door. "You can keep your memories, Mom, but not the deed." The sentence came from across the breakfast table, where sunlight fell over the same ceramic mug I'd used for 20 years. The smell of coffee still filled the kitchen, rich and steady, the way my husband liked it brewed, strong enough to wake the dead, he used to say. I held the mug with both hands, steady now, no tremor, no pleading left in me. The warmth from it didn't comfort anymore. It reminded me that some things, once cooled, never heat back up again. Ethan placed a sleek black briefcase on the table. "I just want to get this over with," he said. "The lawyer's waiting for your signature. We can deposit your share before noon." "Before noon?" I smiled faintly. "That's fast." Claire stood by the counter, arms crossed, her voice calm but sharp. "You've had enough time to grieve, Mom. We're trying to handle this the right way." I looked at the stack of papers. The top page carried a seal, but no scent of truth. My husband's name appeared, printed cleanly, but something was missing. The small curve of my own initials that once followed his. My eyes traced every line. "You should read these things carefully," I said. "They have a habit of changing what's yours." Claire laughed under her breath. "You mean what was his?" Her words clung to the air like the smell of burned toast. Ethan slid the papers toward me with a pen. "Just sign them. You'll still have enough to be comfortable. Dad would want that." Would he? The thought pulsed quietly as I tilted my head, pretending to study the fine print. My husband's lawyer, Mr. Coleman, a kind man with thinning hair, had already told me the truth 2 days ago. The file at the bank still listed me as the sole owner. These copies, whatever they were, could never replace the original deed locked safely under the piano bench in the living room. I took a slow sip of coffee. "I suppose comfort isn't always about money," I murmured. Claire frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, setting the mug down. "I'll take these to my room and go over them once more." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't need to. I already confirmed everything." I stood, smoothing the corner of the top page. "Then one more look won't hurt." The morning stretched longer than usual. Outside, the mail truck rattled by. I could hear its brakes hiss at the corner, a small reminder that the world moved on while my son plotted to erase my name from my own home. Upstairs, I spread the papers across the bed, page after page, each one a mirror of betrayal printed in black ink. My husband's trust fund references were gone. The inheritance clause replaced with a transfer authorization. They'd crafted it cleanly, but the missing signature made it useless. By midday, I tucked the fake set under a pile of magazines. The real deed, folded carefully in its worn envelope, waited inside the hollow bench beneath the piano. I ran a hand along the keys, cold, smooth, silent. My husband used to play on quiet mornings like this. "Music steadies the mind," he'd say. I understood now what he meant. Strategy needed rhythm. When I returned downstairs, Ethan was pacing. "You're stalling again." "Reading," I corrected. "It's a lost habit these days." Claire shot me a look. "You think this is a game?" I smiled. "No, games need rules." Ethan slammed his palm against the table. "Mom, you don't know what you're risking." I did. They were drowning in debt, his failed investment, her remodeling spree, the hidden loans that had already eaten through the insurance. They needed this sale, not for me, but for themselves. They thought my silence was ignorance. It was calculation. I gathered the papers and handed them back. "I'll sign when I'm ready." "You're wasting time," Claire hissed. "The buyer won't wait forever." "Then let him find another house," I said. "This one's not going anywhere." They left before sunset, slamming the door behind them. I washed the mug, dried it carefully, and placed it beside the photograph on the shelf. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the hallway clock, steady as breath. I could almost hear my husband's voice again, reminding me, everything has a rhythm. Patience first, then proof. I looked at the pen they'd left behind, its tip blotched with a small smear of ink. When I turned it in the light, I noticed the stain on my thumb, a dark smudge that refused to fade. I smiled faintly. He never noticed my initials weren't there. "Where's all the furniture, Mom?" The question hit before the door even closed. I watched Ethan's eyes dart around the living room like a stranger's. The chairs, the side table, the china cabinet, all gone. What remained was silence and dust, sunlight spilling in through bare curtains. The smell of cardboard still lingered from last night. I'd packed until after midnight, my hands aching, the driver's van idling outside the gate. Every box was labeled with fake charity stickers. Not one of them was donated. "I thought it was time to simplify," I said. "Less clutter, easier to breathe." Claire's laugh was small but sharp. "You gave everything away, including the dining set Dad bought?" Some families might need it more, I answered. Ethan frowned, stepping closer to the wall where the safe used to hang behind a painting. You moved that too? I shrugged. Didn't like the look of it there anymore. He rubbed his jaw. Mom, that safe had documents, important ones. So I'm told, I said, keeping my voice even. He turned to Claire. She's losing it. I'm right here, I said, and I'm fine. Their pity wasn't real. It was strategy. I could see it in the way they whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. Claire walked to the kitchen, touching the counter like she was already measuring where her own appliances would go. The emptiness unsettled her. Good. It should. Ethan sat on the couch that used to face my husband's armchair. You can't keep doing this, Mom. It's not healthy. Decluttering? I smiled faintly. I read it helps people move on. He looked at me carefully. You sold something, didn't you? Why would I sell? I asked. I've got enough saved. He didn't answer, but I caught the flicker in his expression. Fear mixed with guilt. Something was wrong beneath his calm front. I'd overheard fragments of a phone call weeks before the funeral. His voice low, urgent. A payment missed. A deadline approaching. My husband's name used like collateral. I stood near the window and watched a van pass outside. My reflection looked smaller against the empty room. Sometimes, I said softly, we have to decide what's worth keeping. Claire returned, holding one of the leftover receipts I'd left purposely on the counter. What's this? A storage rental? Oh, that, I said. Just some old things I couldn't part with. Why would you store junk? She snapped. I met her eyes. Because junk tells stories you're not ready to hear. Her face reddened. You're being cryptic again. Ethan rubbed his temples. Mom, if you're hiding something, I'm protecting something, I interrupted. He froze, studying me. What do you mean? I didn't elaborate. The less I said, the more they'd wonder. I let silence grow until it became uncomfortable. Eventually, he stood. I'll call the bank tomorrow. We'll get clarity. Do that, I said. It's always good to double-check who owns what. He paused. You know something, don't you? I smiled. I know everything in this house has its place. They left after lunch, slamming the door hard enough to shake the picture frame still hanging in the hallway. When the sound faded, I walked to the piano and lifted the bench lid. The real deed rested beneath an envelope marked personal. My husband's handwriting. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper, steady and deliberate. The storage receipt sat next to it, dated one day before the funeral. Proof of my first move. That evening, I made tea and sat in the emptiness I'd created. It wasn't loneliness. It was defense. Every bare wall, every missing chair was a statement. They could measure my losses all they wanted. There was still one thing they couldn't see. Control. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Their glow reflected in the van mirror parked across the road. My driver had promised to guard the unit until I called. I trusted him more than my own blood. I looked around the stripped room, and a thought came quietly. They weren't counting furniture. They were counting what they'd already lost. They began counting my furniture like money. Your husband saved my life once. The voice came from behind me as I stood near the post office steps, waiting for the clock tower to strike noon. The day was warm, the kind that made the pavement shimmer faintly. I turned and saw an older man holding a folded newspaper under his arm. His suit looked worn, but pressed with care. His smile wasn't curious. It was knowing. I'm sorry, I said. Do I know you? Harold Bennett, he said. Your husband and I worked together years back at the town registry. He helped me out when I couldn't pay my rent, told the landlord to take it from his own pocket. I never forgot. The air between us changed. It had been weeks since anyone spoke of my husband with warmth instead of pity. I nodded, steadying my breath. He never mentioned that. He wouldn't have, Harold said. He wasn't the type to keep score. We started walking down Main Street together. The faint toll of a church bell drifted through the wind. Harold spoke slowly, his words careful, as though each memory deserved to land fully before moving on. "I heard there's been trouble about the property," he said. "That true?" I hesitated. "Trouble finds anyone who owns something worth taking." He chuckled softly. "That sounds like something he'd say. Come by the archives with me. There's something you might want to see." Inside the old building, the smell of aged paper filled the air. Dust swirled in thin beams of light. Harold led me to a long drawer full of yellowed folders. He slid one open and handed me a newspaper clipping, dated 20 years back. My husband's name was printed near the bottom. "Local man clears community debt for injured worker," it read. Beside it, a faded picture of Harold shaking his hand. I traced the ink with my thumb, the texture rough but solid. "He really did this?" I asked. "He did," Harold said. "That man helped me when I couldn't help myself. And I'll tell you something. He filed every transaction with your name attached too. Joint ownership, always. That's not something he'd forget." A quiet steadiness filled me. "So it's in the archives?" "Every record," he said. "If you need a copy, I can certify it myself." I followed him to his small desk. The typewriter keys clacked unevenly as he filled out the document. "You're certain you want this notarized?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "If my name disappears from their papers, it'll still live here." He smiled faintly. "Smart woman." For the first time in days, I exhaled without shaking. The sound of the stamp pressing onto paper echoed through the room. It felt heavier than any threat I'd heard at home. Proof had its own weight, quiet, undeniable. Harold signed the bottom corner and slid the copy toward me. "There," he said. "Official and traceable. Nobody can question this." I folded the paper carefully, placing it in my bag beside the folded letter I still carried from my husband's jacket. The two pieces of evidence rested together now, one born from love, the other from law. "You ever think about selling that place?" Harold asked gently. I shook my head. "It's not for sale. It's a promise." He nodded, satisfied. "Then keep it that way." When I stepped back outside, the afternoon light had shifted, longer, lower. The bell struck 1, sharp against the quiet street. Each step I took toward home felt deliberate, like retracing the foundation of everything they were trying to erase. I wasn't walking through grief anymore. I was walking through proof. By the time I reached the gate, I could already hear Ethan's car engine rumbling from up the road. No doubt he'd return with new excuses, new threats dressed as concern. But the paper in my bag changed the balance. He could talk all he wanted. My husband had already spoken for me years ago. I locked the front door behind me, placed the certified copy under the piano bench, and rested my hand on the smooth wood. "You built this right," I whispered, "and now it's sealed again." Harold's seal clicked louder than Ethan's threats. "Sign now, or we call the movers." The envelope hit the table like a weapon. Claire's voice was calm, rehearsed, dripping with false mercy. Ethan stood behind her, eyes low, hands buried in his pockets. I could hear the faint tick of the hallway clock, slow and deliberate, counting down to the next betrayal. It was late morning, too early for threats, too late for reason. "What is this?" I asked. "It's official," Claire said. "You've had weeks to cooperate. We're just trying to make the transition smooth." I unfolded the paper. The sound of it crackled in the silence. My name was printed wrong. The officer's name line was blank. It was a forgery, one more lie, this time wrapped in a legal tone. I looked up at Ethan. "You expect me to believe this?" He sighed. "It's for your own good, Mom. You can't live here alone." "Then why does this notice say eviction?" I asked. Claire smiled faintly. "Because it's faster." They expected tears, confusion, anything they could film. Instead, I reached for my phone. "Whose signature is this?" I said, turning the document toward them. "Tell me the officer's name." Ethan glanced at Claire. She shifted uneasily. "You don't need to make this ugly," she said. "It already is," I replied. You made sure of that. I took a picture of the notice and sent it to Harold. Within minutes, his message came back. Invalid document. No court approval. Don't sign anything. I felt my shoulders loosen. For the first time, they realized I wasn't the fragile woman they'd imagined. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. You think we're bluffing? I think you're desperate, I said quietly. He leaned closer. You're ruining everything. We had buyers lined up. Buyers for what you don't own? I said. That's bold. Claire lifted her phone and began recording. This is proof, she said. Proof that we tried to help you. Help me? I asked. By faking a court order? Her face tightened. You don't understand. Ethan's drowning in debt. If this sale doesn't go through... So that's it, I said softly. My husband's house for your second chance. Ethan's voice broke through the tension. You're being cruel. I met his eyes. I learned from the best. The clock ticked again. 1, 2, 3, and I knew the moment had shifted. Their threats had lost weight. Claire's camera shook in her hand. Outside, a few neighbors stood by the fence, watching. The whole street had heard her voice. Good. Let them. I stepped forward. Go ahead, I said. Call the movers. Call whoever you like. Just make sure they bring real papers next time. Ethan's jaw clenched. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll regret it under my own roof. They left without another word. The front door slammed, and the house fell silent, except for the clock's steady rhythm. I looked at the fake notice one last time before folding it neatly back into the envelope. Proof of their intent was as valuable as proof of ownership. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch and typed a formal complaint to the neighborhood committee, attaching Harold's confirmation. Emotional harassment. False eviction attempt. The words felt heavy but right. When I hit send, I exhaled a quiet laugh. The first line of defense was no longer silence. It was record. By nightfall, the porch light cast a soft glow across the walkway. I kept it on, brighter than usual. Let them come again, with cameras or threats. Let them see that I was done pretending to be afraid. I left the porch light on for the police. The $2.8 million is gone! Ethan's voice cracked through the phone so loud I had to hold it away from my ear. It was early afternoon, the clock striking 2, and the echo of that number hung between us like a threat. Claire's voice came next, sharp and panicked. You withdrew it, didn't you? Admit it, Mom. Just tell the truth. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting the ringing in my ears settle. What money are you talking about? I asked. Dad's inheritance fund, Ethan snapped. The one meant to cover the property taxes and estate fees. It's empty. Empty? I repeated. That's strange. I haven't even checked that account. He exhaled hard. Don't lie to me. The bank says the transfer cleared before the funeral. That word, before, cut through the noise. Before the funeral. Before his tears. Before the fake notice. My heart slowed. Ethan, why would I move money when I didn't even know he was gone? Silence. Then Claire jumped in. You probably planned this for months. That's why you hid the furniture, right? To sell it quietly. I see, I said. You've already written my confession. Claire scoffed. Everyone's talking. You should know that. Everyone. The neighbors, the committee, the same people who watched her humiliate me on the porch. I could picture their whispers spreading like wildfire. She took the money. Old age makes people greedy. Maybe she was never stable after all. Then let them talk, I said calmly. I'm sure the truth will surface. After they hung up, I stared at the quiet phone on the table. The sound of its last vibration still hummed faintly in the air. I knew what I had to do. Within the hour, I was sitting across from the fraud investigator at the local bank. He adjusted his glasses, typing into his computer. The account logs show a withdrawal of $2.8 million 5 days before your husband's funeral, he said. Signature authorization matches your son's name. Want to file a complaint? Not yet, I said. How long before this becomes public record? "Soon," he said. "But once filed, you can't unring that bell." I nodded. "Then we wait." He leaned forward. "You're remarkably calm for someone accused of theft." "Because I know what fear looks like," I said, "and it's not on my face." Back home, the phone rang again before dusk. This time, no shouting, just Claire's trembling voice. "People are saying we stole from you," she whispered. "Ethan's furious. He says you told the bank." "I didn't tell them anything," I said, "but maybe someone else did." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the truth doesn't need help." For a few seconds, all I could hear was her breathing. Then she muttered, "You've ruined us," and the line went dead. By evening, I heard the first wave of gossip from the neighborhood. Some said I hid the money offshore. Others swore Ethan had forged the transfer under stress. The committee stopped by, pretending concern. "We just want to know you're all right," they said. Their eyes searched my living room like investigators. "I'm fine," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" That night, the fraud investigator called again. "Just confirming, the funds were wired to an investment account registered under your son's business name. We've frozen access pending verification." "Thank you," I said. "Keep me updated." He paused. "You want to press charges later?" "I want him to worry first," I said. I turned off the lights and stood near the piano bench where the certified deed and the newspaper clipping still rested together. Every piece of proof was quiet, waiting, like a trap set under velvet. Ethan thought money would bury the truth. He forgot money leaves footprints, every number, every transfer, every lie recorded in a ledger that doesn't forgive. I looked toward the hallway where the house key hung beside another. The small brass one he never noticed, the one that belonged to my husband's old bank box. My voice barely rose above a whisper, but I said it anyway. "They forgot I still have his bank key. She's losing her mind, poor thing." That's how it began, softly, like smoke slipping under doors. By the time I heard it, the words had already been passed from one neighbor to another, each adding a touch of pity to make the cruelty sound kind. I was pruning the roses when Mrs. Fletcher from across the street leaned over the fence. "We're worried about you," she said. "People say you've been confused lately." "Confused?" I smiled faintly. "Only about who my real family is." She blushed and backed away, muttering something about prayer meetings. A faint trace of Claire's perfume lingered in the air. It was unmistakable, sweet, synthetic, and deliberate. That was her style, poison wrapped in politeness. By noon, the whispers had turned into sympathy visits. Someone slipped a pamphlet from the community center through my mailbox, Elder Care and Mental Wellness. A suggestion disguised as help. I let it sit on the counter, unopened. I'd learned that sometimes silence unsettles people more than denial. Later that day, the pastor knocked. His voice carried that cautious tone people use when they've already chosen sides. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" he asked. "There have been concerns." I gestured toward the living room. "Concerns travel fast around here." He sat down, glancing at the empty shelves where family photos used to be. "I heard some talk. About finances, about confusion." I reached for the drawer beside me and placed 2 papers on the table. Harold's certified deed, copy, and the investigator's statement showing Ethan's withdrawals. "You're free to read them," I said. He hesitated, scanning the signatures. His eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. "These are valid." "Yes," I said. "Truth usually is." He exhaled slowly, setting the papers down. "I shouldn't have listened to gossip." "You shouldn't have repeated it either," I replied. "But you came. That counts for something." He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "Would you like me to address this at Sunday service?" "No," I said. "Let them talk. They'll find their own silence soon enough." After he left, I returned to the garden. The sun was low, glowing faintly against the porch rail. I knelt by the soil, feeling the cool earth press under my palms. Across the street, Claire stood pretending to chat with a neighbor, her voice carrying just enough to reach me. "It's heartbreaking," she said. "I think she's hiding things from everyone. I smiled, let her keep digging. Every lie she planted was sprouting weeds in her own yard. An hour later, the first shift came. Mrs. Fletcher crossed over again, this time hesitant. "I spoke to the pastor," she said. "He told us about the paperwork. I'm sorry, I didn't know." "That's the point," I said. "Nobody asked." She nodded, guilt written across her face. "Claire's been visiting people all week." "I know," I said. "She always liked an audience." The air smelled faintly of the same perfume again, drifting from down the block. I realized she'd been there moments earlier, leaving her mark on everyone she touched. But perfume fades faster than proof. By late afternoon, people began turning their suspicion on each other. One neighbor accused another of starting the rumor. Someone mentioned seeing Ethan at the bank when he claimed to be out of town. The cracks spread like water under glass. I watered my garden slowly, each motion deliberate. The hose made a soft hiss that filled the space where whispers used to be. A few of them watched from their porches, pretending to tidy up or collect mail. I met every gaze with calm, no anger, no defense. Just a quiet rhythm, the sound of routine reclaimed. A single pamphlet lay on the edge of the lawn, damp from the sprinkler. I picked it up and tossed it in the trash. "I'm not the one who needs saving," I murmured. That evening, the smell of soil and old roses lingered as the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. The gossip had eaten itself alive, leaving truth standing untouched. By dusk, they whispered about each other. "Everything leaves a paper trail, son." Harold said it like a teacher reminding a child of gravity. I watched his hands move across the table, gathering papers into neat, deliberate stacks. Deed copy, will letter, transfer receipts. Each one had a date, a stamp, a signature, tiny pieces of truth that couldn't be erased by gossip or guilt. The afternoon sun poured through the blinds, striping the wood surface with long bands of gold. He passed me a stapler. "Start with this pile," he said. "We'll go in order, property first, funds second." I pressed each staple with slow precision, the sound echoing through the quiet room. "Feels like I'm sewing something back together," I said. "That's exactly what you're doing," he replied. "You're stitching up what they tried to tear apart." We worked in silence for a while. Outside, I could hear the faint hum of cars passing, the world unaware that justice was being rebuilt one sheet at a time. The air smelled faintly of old paper and dust, the kind that clings to years of neglect and memory. When we finished, Harold aligned the pages and clipped them tight. "You know," he said, "once we file this, there's no going back. They'll have to face the record." "That's the point," I said. "I'm not fighting them anymore. I'm just letting the truth speak." He smiled slightly. "That's the most dangerous thing you can do." By mid-morning, we were standing inside the town clerk's office. The waiting area was quiet, except for the soft rustle of forms and the steady tap of a wall clock. When our turn came, Harold slid the folder across the counter. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with clear glasses, adjusted her chair and began reading. "This is quite a file," she said. "You're submitting all of it for certification?" "Yes," I said, "every piece." She nodded, stamping each section with slow, careful pressure. The sound of the seal imprinting the page sent a small tremor through my fingers each time. "This makes your ownership official," she explained. "They can't contest without perjury now." "Then let them try," I said quietly. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done more than defend yourself," he said. "You've documented everything. That's how the strong survive." As we stepped outside, sunlight hit the polished seal at the edge of the folder, glinting off the metal clip. I ran my thumb along the raised mark. It felt solid, final. The town square around us buzzed with ordinary life, and for the first time in months, I felt part of it again. That afternoon, I received a call from legal aid. "We've filed the certified deed," the voice said. "A summons is being prepared for Ethan and Claire. Misrepresentation and false claims of ownership." "Thank you," I said. "Please keep it quiet for now." "Of course," the woman replied. "But once the notice is served, it becomes public record." I hung up, the weight of it settling slowly in my chest, not heavy like guilt, but steady like closure. I walked into the living room and sat on the piano bench where my husband used to read the mail. The same bench where I first found the letter about the estate years ago. The surface was smooth under my palm, cool and familiar. "You told me to protect what we built," I whispered. "I'm doing that now." I heard Harold's car pull away outside. He had said he'd call once the clerk confirmed everything had been logged. The house felt quiet, but not empty anymore. Each drawer, each cabinet, each document was now part of my defense, my voice. Toward evening, a soft knock came at the door. A delivery envelope rested on the step. Official seal, return address from the county office. Inside was a certified copy of the deed with my name printed clean and centered. No confusion, no contest, no family clause to twist. I stood by the window as the sun dropped lower, watching its last light skim the edge of the porch railing. Somewhere across town, Ethan and Claire would be opening their own envelope, a summons instead of validation. Harold was right. Everything leaves a paper trail. They finally realized whose house it really was. "You think this will end in a courtroom?" Ethan's voice hit the walls before I even saw him. The storm outside was gathering fast, wind pressing against the windows, thunder rolling like distant drums. He stood in the doorway, soaked and furious, the official letter from legal aid crushed in his fist. "You had no right to involve the police," he said. "I had every right," I replied. "They asked for documents. I gave them proof." He stepped closer. "Proof? You mean the lies Harold fed you?" "They weren't lies. They were records." He laughed, sharp and ugly. "You really think this little file of papers can protect you? You're going to ruin your own family's name." Names don't mean much when the people behind them forget what honesty is. He slammed his hand on the table. The teacup beside him rattled and cracked down the middle. The sound sliced through the tension like a warning. I glanced at the tiny fracture, knowing exactly what to do next. Without a word, I slid my phone closer to the edge of the table, screen down, camera on, and hit record. "I'm listening," I said quietly. Ethan paced the floor. "You think this is about money? It's about dignity, about reputation. You want to play the victim, but you're the one embarrassing us." "I'm not the one who transferred the money," I said, "or lied to the neighbors, or forged signatures." "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "You think I won't throw you out again? You think the court will side with someone like you?" "Someone like me?" I said. "You mean the person who raised you?" He froze. For a split second, his face faltered. Then the thunder cracked again, and his anger returned twice as hard. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "The lawyers can't save you. I'll make sure the whole town knows what kind of manipulative old woman you really are." "That's enough," I said, but he kept going, voice rising with the storm. "You'll end up alone in this house, broke, forgotten, waiting for someone to pick up your remains." The front door burst open mid-threat. A sharp gust of rain came through, followed by two officers. One of them raised a hand. "Mr. Wallace, that's enough." Ethan turned, startled. "This is private property," he said. The officer's tone stayed even. "You've been warned already. The restraining terms are being processed. You'll need to leave." Ethan looked back at me, jaw tight. "You called them?" "I didn't have to," I said, "but I did record you." He blinked, confused. "You what?" "Your threats," I said. "Every word. Would you like to hear how you sound when you talk about dignity?" He lunged for the phone, but the officer stepped between us. "That's evidence now," the officer said. "You should go." "You can't do this to me," Ethan shouted. "She's twisting everything. I'm the one who's been wronged." The officer kept his voice steady. "You can explain that downtown." Ethan glared at me. "You'll regret it." "I already did," I said, "years ago." They guided him out into the storm. The rain swallowed his words, turning them into muffled echoes as the door closed behind him. For a moment, all I could hear was the rain hammering against the roof and the faint hum of the refrigerator. One of the officers turned back to me. "You did the right thing," he said. "That recording will help the case." I nodded, though my hands trembled. "It's not about winning," I said. It's about being safe." He gave a short nod and left. I stood in the quiet that followed, staring at the cracked teacup still sitting on the table. A small piece of it had broken off completely, resting beside the saucer like a token of everything that had fractured between us. The rain eased after an hour. The thunder moved farther away, leaving behind a gray stillness that felt heavier than the noise. I picked up the cup, traced the fracture with my thumb, and whispered, "Some things don't break. They reveal where the pressure always was." Through the window, I could just make out Ethan's shadow moving toward his car, shoulders rigid, head down. He shouted my name once, twice, but the wind carried it off into the dark. He left shouting my name into the rain. "Mrs. Lane, do you wish to speak?" The question floated through the courtroom like a test of endurance. I stood slowly, one hand on the polished wooden table to steady myself. The air inside was dry, heavy with waiting. My lawyer gave a small nod, and I faced the judge. The microphone stood too close, picking up every breath. Somewhere behind me I could hear the faint shuffle of chairs and a single cough breaking the stillness. "Yes," I said. "I do." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I told them how my husband's property, his life's work, was transferred without consent. How the signature on the original deed wasn't his. How I discovered the withdrawals, the falsified notice, and the threats that followed when I refused to sign. Each sentence was plain, short, deliberate. Truth didn't need decoration. The judge listened without interruption. When I finished, my lawyer placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. The familiar sound filled the room. Ethan's voice, sharp, unhinged, echoing off the walls. Every word he'd spoken in rage now looped back on itself under oath. "You'll regret this," the recording spat. "You'll lose everything." A few people in the audience exchanged glances. The judge's expression didn't change, but the stillness deepened. When the clip ended, my lawyer slid a document forward. "Your Honor, this is the notarized deed, certified 2 weeks ago by the county office." The clerk took it and carried it to the bench. The gavel tapped once, the sound sharp enough to ripple through the entire room. Ethan leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously. Claire, sitting a few seats away, couldn't contain herself. "This is her revenge," she shouted. "She's making us look like thieves." The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Wallace, please remain silent." But Claire kept going. "She's lying. She hated us from the start." "That will be enough," the judge said, firmer this time. Claire's voice cracked mid-sentence and fell away into a stunned quiet. The bailiff's eyes never left her. I didn't look at them. I kept my gaze fixed on the bench, on the single piece of paper that had rewritten the balance of power in that room. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," I said. "I just want what's rightfully mine restored, that's all." The judge leaned forward. "You've been through considerable distress." "I've been through discovery," I said. "The rest is just consequence." The lawyer for the defense shifted uneasily, trying to recover some footing. "Your Honor, we request additional time to review the recordings and documents." The judge nodded once. "The court will recess for verification. A formal verdict will be issued after review." The sound of chairs scraping filled the space, followed by murmurs rising like static. Some people were whispering names, others shaking their heads. The weight of public perception had already shifted. The truth didn't need the verdict. It had already made its way into the room. As the bailiff collected the evidence, Ethan stood stiffly, pretending calm. His knuckles were white. Claire refused to look at me, staring instead at the floor like it had betrayed her too. I picked up my handbag, slow and steady, and turned toward the exit. Each step sounded louder than the last, echoing through the chamber as if the room itself were recording this moment too. Outside, sunlight hit the courthouse steps with a brightness that felt almost cruel. My lawyer caught up to me halfway down. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "The delay's routine, but it's over, really. They're done." "I know," I said. "That's why it feels quiet." We stopped near the bottom of the stairs. Reporters hovered at a distance, unsure if they should approach. I didn't look their way. I just watched the doors close behind Ethan and Claire. They walked separately, no longer a united front, their silence louder than any defense. For a brief second, I thought of my husband, the way he'd sit on that same courthouse bench decades ago to sign the first mortgage, smiling like a man building something unbreakable. He used to say, "Paper protects what people try to steal." Now, his words had come full circle. The wind carried a faint echo from inside, the gavel striking once more, final and cold. It wasn't a verdict yet, but it was enough. The gavel fell, but silence hit harder. They're selling their cars to pay the fines. That's what Harold said when he stopped by that morning, holding the newspaper like it was proof that the world had finally caught up. I didn't ask for details. I just nodded, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and poured him coffee. The smell of print and ink drifted between us as he unfolded the page across the kitchen table. The headline was simple: Fraud verdict issued. Estate ownership restored. Below it, Ethan's name appeared in smaller text, followed by the words, "Financial misconduct" and "Restitution ordered." There was a list of assets, 2 vehicles, a joint account, and a pending property sale to repay debts. I traced the lines once, just to be sure I wasn't imagining them. It was all real, and for the first time, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Harold set his cup down gently. "You know," he said, "this kind of thing changes how people see you." "I'm not looking to be seen," I replied. "I'm just tired of being erased." He nodded, the way people do when they understand more than they say. "They'll have to start over," he added quietly. "It'll hurt." "I'm sure it already does," I said, "but pain has a way of teaching truth." The clock on the counter ticked past 9. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Doors opening, mailboxes closing, someone calling for their dog, ordinary sounds, the kind that used to sting when I felt like a ghost in my own street. Now they just blended into the morning. Around 10, Mrs. Fletcher walked by the front gate. For a moment I thought she'd pretend not to see me, the way she used to when rumors were easier than facts. But she waved, tentative but sincere. "Good morning," she called. "Lovely day." "It is," I said, and I meant it. After she left, I sat on the porch and unfolded the paper again. The sunlight caught the edges of the page, and for a second I could see the faint texture of the print. My name appeared once in the article, next to a phrase that read, "Plaintiff demonstrated consistent evidence and composure." I smiled at that, not for praise, but for precision. Consistent evidence and composure, that's exactly what it took. Harold stood and stretched. "You should frame that headline," he said. "No," I told him. "I've framed too many things in this house. Some memories don't need glass." He chuckled. "You'll keep it, though." "I'll keep the peace it gave me." He left soon after, and I spent the next hour trimming the garden. The soil was firm from last night's rain, and the sun had warmed the porch rail. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was earned. The same neighbors who once whispered now stopped to say hello. A few even offered to help carry bags of mulch. I thanked them, but preferred to finish on my own. Solitude used to frighten me. Now it felt like proof that I could stand without witnesses. Inside, the living room still carried the faint scent of paper and coffee. I folded the newspaper carefully, smoothed the creases, and looked toward the mantel. His photograph sat there, the same one from our first winter in this house. He was smiling in his old work jacket, proud, grounded. The light through the window hit the frame just right, turning the glass into a mirror for a second. I caught my own reflection beside his and thought, "We kept it safe, just like you wanted." The doorbell rang once. Delivery. A small envelope from the county clerk confirming the judgment had been filed and cleared. I set it on the counter unopened. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. The proof had already lived in me long before paper caught up. By afternoon, the neighborhood quieted again. A car I didn't recognize slowed in front of the house. The driver looked, then drove off. Probably one of theirs, I thought. The world was smaller for them now, just as mine had grown larger. I picked up the folded newspaper, walked back to the living room, and stood by the mantel one more time. For a long moment, I said nothing. The house didn't need words, it already knew. The years of noise, of accusation, of proof and paperwork, all of it ended here, under the same roof that had once held everything we built. I placed the paper beside his photograph. His chair stays where it was. I've moved everything else over the years, curtains, shelves, even the rug beneath the window. But not that chair. It sits in the same corner where he used to read every morning, sunlight falling across the armrest like it still belongs to him. The fabric is faded now, worn where his elbow used to rest, but it holds the shape of memory better than anything else in this house. At dawn, the quiet feels heavier. I pour 1 cup of coffee instead of 2. The air carries that faint warmth of old wood and dust, something steady, something honest. Outside, a bird taps against the glass and flies away. The house returns to stillness. "I kept everything safe," I whisper, even when they tried to take it all. The old watch on the table ticks faintly beside the folded deed. It hasn't kept perfect time in years, but I never changed the battery. The sound isn't precision anymore. It's presence. Every tick reminds me that something is still moving, even if I'm not rushing to catch up. I think about what Harold said after the hearing. You could sell, start fresh somewhere quieter. But where do you go when peace already lives inside your walls? This house isn't just property. It's the record of what we built, and what I had to defend when love turned into proof. The morning light shifts slowly across the floorboards. Dust glimmers in thin bands, and I remember sweeping this same floor decades ago, barefoot, laughing because he tracked mud from the garden again. We fought about little things then, paint colors, grocery lists, money, never about betrayal, never about signatures. You'd laugh at how serious it all got, I say softly. You'd say I turned into you, the one who kept every receipt, every letter, every promise in writing. Maybe I did. Maybe that was the only way to survive when words stopped meaning anything outside of paper. The chair sits there like a witness. I talk to it more than I should. They finally learned, I tell it. Truth doesn't vanish just because someone buries it under paperwork. My voice shakes a little, but it's not from sadness, it's from release. Around 7, I open the window. The sound of the ticking grows faint against the soft hum of traffic down the street. Life goes on, indifferent and rhythmic. I look at the garden below, trimmed, clean, alive again. The same patch Ethan once mocked as useless labor. Now it's my proof that care isn't wasted effort. I reach for the folder, the same one that carried every document through the months of hearings and doubt. The paper inside is smooth, official, final. I read the deed once more, the ink now familiar enough to feel like handwriting. The name across the top belongs to me again. I run my thumb across the embossed seal and close it carefully. You did your part, I murmur. Now it's my turn to keep it safe. I slide the folder into the drawer beneath the window and turn the key. It clicks once, firm and quiet. That sound feels like the last chapter of something long and heavy. The clock on the wall ticks in answer. I can almost imagine his hand tapping the armrest, the rhythm falling in step with it. "Don't let it stop," he used to say whenever I forgot to wind the old watch. "Even if time slows, keep it alive." So I leave it, ticking, not for punctuality, but for remembrance. Every second it counts is one he gave me, and one I learned to reclaim. The sunlight reaches the edge of his chair, bright enough to touch the worn edge of the armrest. I rest my palm there, just long enough to feel the warmth spread beneath my skin. "You can rest now," I whisper. "We're home again." The chair stays where it was. The watch keeps ticking. The clock ticked, but time finally slowed. "You were right, love. It wasn't theirs." I said it out loud before I even realized I was speaking. The words came easily, like they had been waiting in my throat for years. I was cleaning the drawer under the old dresser when I found it. The envelope, yellowed around the edges, but still sealed enough to hold its shape. The handwriting was unmistakable, a little uneven, a little proud. His. The faint scent of old paper carried something I hadn't felt in a long time, a trace of the home we built before the noise began. My hands shook as I turned the envelope over. The rose in the vase beside me had just started to wilt, its petals bending low, but the color still clung to it. Maybe that's what endurance really looks like, not untouched beauty, but what remains when everything else falls apart. I opened the letter slowly. The paper inside was soft and thin, the kind that threatens to tear if you rush. His words were written in blue ink, still clear enough to read. "You'll always hold this house together, even if I'm gone. Promise me you'll never hand it to anyone who treats it like property." I could hear his voice in those lines, calm, certain, trusting. I smiled through the ache in my chest. "I kept the promise," I whispered, "even when they tried to break it." I read the rest quietly, tracing each word with my thumb. He had written about the garden, how he hoped it would keep growing no matter who lived here. He mentioned the mortgage, the savings account, the little financial details that used to make me roll my eyes. Now they felt sacred, proof that he had thought ahead, that he had built a map I could follow long after he was gone. The clock on the wall ticked faintly behind me, steady and forgiving. Outside, a few children shouted in the street, their laughter cutting through the stillness. It reminded me of when our own house used to sound like that. Noise, chaos, life. I folded the letter halfway and held it against my chest. "You were right," I said again. "It wasn't theirs. It never was." I set the paper on the table beside the rose vase and looked around the room. Every corner held a mark of what we'd fought for. The fixed wall by the staircase, the repaired frame above the mantel, the sealed drawer that once held fear instead of proof. Everything had been touched, tested, and restored. Harold once told me closure feels like silence. But this felt alive, like breath returning after a long hold. I reached for the rose and adjusted it upright. A single petal fell, landing beside the envelope. The contrast, red against cream, made me laugh softly. "He'd say that's art," I murmured. "Unplanned, but right where it belongs." I sat down, the letter still in front of me. "You'd be proud," I said quietly. "Not because I won, because I stayed." My voice cracked on that last word. I let it. I had earned the right not to be composed all the time. The afternoon light crept across the floorboards, catching the corner of the letter. I watched the shadow of the rose shift slowly, like it was bowing to it. The air smelled faintly of the paper, aged but not gone. I smiled at the thought that even ink has its own kind of memory. I reached for a clean sheet from the drawer and began writing beneath his words, not to send, not to prove, just to answer. "You were right about everything. I didn't lose it. I didn't lose me." I folded my note and slipped it back into the same envelope, sealing it with the smallest press of my thumb. Then I placed it upright against the vase so it would stand like a keepsake, not an artifact. The day outside was quieting down, the late sunlight soft against the window pane. I didn't feel heavy anymore. The fight, the court, the judgment, they were finished chapters. What remained wasn't an ending. It was inheritance, not of land or money, but of steadiness. I leaned back, listening to the soft creak of the chair, the quiet ticking from the wall, and the echo of his words inside my mind. They no longer hurt. They held. The ink hadn't faded. Neither had I. "Didn't I tell you whose house it really was?" That line used to sound like defiance. Now, months later, it feels like gratitude. The porch looks different tonight. Fresh paint, repaired railings, the kind of small improvements you make not to impress anyone, but to say, "We stayed." The new light above the door hums faintly, casting a steady glow across the front yard. It's warm, not sharp, the kind of light that welcomes instead of warns. People began arriving around 6. Neighbors, familiar faces, and a few strangers who'd read the small notice in the paper about a charity gathering for widows needing legal aid. I used to dread crowds on this porch. Too many whispers, too many opinions about things they didn't live through. But tonight, every conversation carries a gentleness I never thought I'd hear here again. Harold handled most of the logistics. "You sure about this?" he'd asked earlier in the week. "After everything, you don't owe anyone a thing." "I know," I told him. "That's why I want to do it." He smiled. That knowing kind of smile people wear when they realize a story has come full circle. On the table by the door sits a small donation box. The wood is simple, carved from a leftover plank we once meant to use for a garden fence. Beside it, I placed a copy of the deed, framed but not as a trophy, as a reminder. People linger near it, whispering quietly, some reading the name twice before nodding like they finally understand. A woman approached me halfway through the evening. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "I lost my house too. Couldn't fight them." I touched her hand. "Then let's make sure someone else can." She smiled, tears catching the porch light for just a second before she blinked them away. That moment, right there, was worth every sleepless night, every form, every hour spent in courtrooms that smelled like cold paper and fear. I thought justice would taste like triumph. Turns out, it tastes like peace. By 7:30, the air had cooled. The last of the coffee was gone, and the chatter softened to a hum. Harold came over holding a folded receipt. "From the first donations," he said. "Almost 600 already." I looked at the slip, the ink still wet from the print. "We'll start small," I said. "One family at a time." "That's how you built this place," he replied. "One piece at a time." The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I could almost hear his voice again, my husband's, telling me to replace that old bulb years ago. I never did back then. Now, I understand why it mattered. Some things aren't about brightness. They're about consistency. I turned to the small group still standing near the gate. "This house," I began, "was once just walls and paper, but it became proof, not just that I owned it, but that I could protect it. And now it stands for something else." Someone in the back called out, "For what?" "For those who have nowhere else," I said simply. The applause was soft at first, then stronger, not loud, but full. It filled the air in a way that didn't overwhelm. It carried respect, not pity. I caught sight of Mrs. Fletcher in the crowd, her hands clasped, eyes bright. The same woman who once crossed the street to avoid me now helped set up chairs. Harold lifted the donation box and smiled. "You want to say a few words before we close?" I shook my head. "No speeches tonight. The light speaks for itself." He nodded, setting the box back down beside the door. As people began to leave, they stopped under that light, one by one, before stepping into the dark street beyond. Every time the door opened, the glow stretched a little farther, over the walkway, down the steps, out into the road. When the last person left, I stood alone for a while, listening to the faint hum of the bulb in the quiet of the neighborhood. The same house that once felt like a battlefield now felt like a promise kept. I glanced at the framed deed one last time. The paper had aged slightly, but the ink still held its weight. Proof, not of ownership anymore, but of endurance. I thought of the woman who said she couldn't fight, and I hoped that soon someone else would find her porch light too. I locked the door, turned back toward the yard, and looked up. The glow from the bulb touched the garden gate, the mailbox, even the rose bush we'd almost lost in the storm. I smiled. The light stays on, this time for others. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story with respect and gratitude.